welcome to episode 93 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian starting my 14th year, I found myself asking the question, where is the podcast that will help me do my job? I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, by my interview guests, and from listeners who contact the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to listeners Harmony and Dale in New York, Amy in Ohio, and Holly in Vancouver. Jennifer in Missouri wrote to tell me that our recent Wikipedia episode with Steve Tatro helped her win an argument with her husband. And as someone who rarely wins arguments with my husband, I feel that listening to this podcast has served yet another, albeit intentional, but very important purpose. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback, questions, and especially episode suggestions, either on Facebook, Twitter, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I will be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now, for today's episode, New Zealand school librarian and my interview with Penny Walch. I am so excited to be talking today with Penny Walch, and I gotta tell you, she is halfway around the world. We are having a conversation with a school librarian living in New Zealand. Penny, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, woohoo! I can't believe this is happening. It's very exciting.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm so excited you're here because nobody needs to listen to my Midwestern accent, but I could listen to you forever.
I have the weirdest accent.
Not at all. Not at all. Friends, New Zealand is like a dream of mine. And for many Americans, this is on our bucket list of places to live. But you weren't born in New Zealand, were you?
No, I was born in England, and then my parents moved us up to Scotland. My mother is Scottish. I don't sound at all Scottish, but that's kind of what I relate to. I say I'm Scottish. My sister, who's 2 years younger than me, says she's English, which is a bit weird. But then I met a New Zealander. That's what you've got to do to get into New Zealand. You meet a New Zealander and you con them into marrying me. And that's what I did, which was kind of cool.
It sounds like true love. But you have lived in New Zealand for many years?
Yeah, I first came over here 30 years ago as a tutor in a school. That's where I met my husband, but then I went back to the UK to teach over there. And then we got married, and we've been living in Hamilton, which is where we live now, for the last 20 years.
Fantastic. Friends, never fear. For the low, low price of $3 million, you too can obtain New Zealand citizenship through investment. I've included a link in the show notes. Because unfortunately, and Penny's going to let us know, I don't think New Zealand is issuing any emergency visas due to a shortage of school librarians. Is that correct?
I'm pretty sure. I couldn't give you the exact details, but I'm pretty sure that they're not accepting huge numbers of people at the moment. Sorry to say, so you probably will have to find a random New Zealander to get here.
And sorry friends, to say. Yeah, I got to tell you right now, nobody wants us. My son's passports arrived in the mail right after they left for college, and I said, good news, you can leave the country. Oh, bad news, nobody wants us. So, friends, I have got to tell you, Penny is in the middle of a holiday between her third term and her fourth term of school. So recording a podcast episode on what should be a quiet, relaxing Sunday morning, you're on vacation, and yet you're here with us.
Oh, yeah, no, it's easier. It's easier in the holidays, I reckon. I think if it had been during term time, that would have been more of a problem because, Sundays are pretty precious during the term time, whereas in the middle of the holidays, it's like, well, doesn't really matter. I love it. It's great. No problem.
Wonderful. So I do want to ask you a few questions that are COVID related.
Sure.
On August 11th of this year, it was announced that the New Zealand had experienced its first COVID case in over 102 days. And at the very same time, the United States was recording more than 1,000 deaths related to COVID per day. And we're going to do our best to keep this conversation absolutely apolitical. But this global pandemic has been experienced very differently for you in New Zealand.
Yeah, I think, obviously it's hard for me to say because I'm only in New Zealand, but we get a lot of world coverage. I'm obviously interested in what's going on in the UK because that's where my parents and my sister live, and most of my family and lots of my friends live over there, so I'm interested in that. And of course we get all the American coverage, so we kind of see what's going on with you guys, and that's interesting to say the least. But our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern seems to have handled it pretty well. She takes a slightly different viewpoint than a lot of the leaders around the world, and that she's about looking after the people before the economy, but keeping in mind obviously the economy as well. And we do have a lot of people that aren't happy with how she's dealt with things, mostly business people, obviously. But yeah, and we've got an election like you guys coming up in the next couple of weeks. It was actually postponed because of COVID. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether which way the vote goes.
Well, I have to ask, so it was postponed due to COVID, and that wasn't met with any sort of pushback? It was a scheduled election, or was this an election that had been called?
It was a scheduled election. It was due to happen, I think it was about September 17th. It was around the time of my daughter's birthday. I remember that, middle of September. And then when we went, we had this sort of mini outbreak again. They called it off. She talks about going hard and going early. I think she called it way back when we went first into lockdown, and she did that again. She likes to make decisions really quickly and then stand by them, which can be a little bit terrifying, and I imagine it's absolutely terrifying for her. But it's at least you know where you stand. So yeah, she postponed the election. We're having it in a couple of weeks' time now. So hopefully that will go ahead.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Let me ask you, everybody has been affected by COVID, and I sense that your experience has been far different from the majority of the listeners who are here in the United States. Could you give us an idea of how COVID transpired in your corner of the world? My assumption was, because you were physically closer to the outbreak, that you would have been more vulnerable. And yet, because you're an island country, it seems to have enabled you to really put up some natural barriers and keep your country safe.
Yeah, I actually definitely think geography has helped us a lot, because, the UK's an island as well, but then, the closeness to Europe has affected them. But because we're so remote, we can, we've been able to lock down our borders pretty easily, which is kind of scary in itself. But yeah, when again it was March, you kind of saw it coming. It's quite surreal thinking about it. You think back to it and you go, we saw it coming, but didn't really think much was going to happen. And then suddenly it all, everything went nuts. And we literally had 3 days to from the decision that she'd made that we were locking down to starting distance learning. We had 3 days to get it sorted. And my husband, who is one of our senior leaders at the school I work at, he was in charge of that. So he was under some massive pressure to get the distance learning sorted. And yeah, we had 3 days to get it sorted. I gathered up all the books that hadn't been processed in the library and took them home. And, then we, off we went. Yeah.
Well, and let me ask you, because I think it's, we'll get to how your calendar works a little bit, but maybe you could explain where in the school year you were, because for Americans, when we were hit in March, this was right around what's called the spring break. It's relatively close to Easter. And so many schools were already on break. And then we were out. Most of us were done with school for what we call the year in May or June. But your calendar is very different. Could you just give us an overview of the school calendar for students in New Zealand?
Yeah, sure. So we start school in January, late January, early February, and that's what we're beginning of our term 1. And then we have 4 terms for the year. So we were literally just over halfway through our first term, which possibly, was advantageous for us because it was early on in the year, and our kids weren't necessarily missing out on some of the things that your guys have missed out on. I don't know. Possibly can't comment on that.
Well, yeah, because you weren't having graduations in January, no. in May and June. I know my son's graduated from high school, and graduation from high school when it's all virtual is only going to be disappointing.
I don't know whether we were so lucky. Now thinking about it as I'm talking to you, and wondering whether, all the cards fell our way in many ways. We're an island. We have a leader that, did things the way she did. We were at the start of the year, so maybe it possibly wasn't as bad for the students. I don't know. Our kids had just been on school camp, so they got that. We went into distance learning 2 weeks before one of our first holiday. So we had 2 weeks to kind of test things out with our distance learning and then reassess, and then had 3-week holiday, and then 2 more weeks after the holiday. And to perfect things, or not perfect things, that's never going to happen, but to do things a little bit better. By which time we had moved from level 4 lockdown. I mean, I don't know if you understand our the way we did things, but there's 4 levels of lockdown, and level 4 was when everyone was shut in their homes. And we went to level 3, slowly went down to level 2, and at level 2 we were able to go back to school. Can
you tell us what approximately when in the year you were all back in school face to face?
So beginning of term 2, which starts in May, we had 2 weeks distance learning. Well, no, we had 2 weeks at level 3. And so what happened then was that the children of essential workers came to school, and specialists. So that was me. I'm included as a specialist. We went in and we looked after bubbles of children. So we had this vocab of bubbles. I don't know if you have it in the US, but various staff looked after little bubbles of children, and we did that for 2 weeks, and then we went back. Then we went to level 2. So 2 weeks into May, approximately, we were all back at school.
Can I
hand sanitizing?
Lots of sanitizing.
I
want to back up for a second. Did you say that the priority was given to the students whose family members were deemed essential workers? Is that correct?
Actually, for our school, anyone. We just, and actually Jacinda, she also kind of mentioned that as well. She said there was to be no judgment about kids who were coming back to school. Their parents did not have to be doctors or nurses or, people that worked in supermarkets. If those parents needed their children to be at school for whatever reason, then we were to ask no questions. So we didn't have huge numbers. I can't remember. It was maybe about 60 kids come to school out of a school of 650. So, yeah.
All right. So let's talk about your library and what sorts of modifications you had to make, because I don't want to be presumptuous, but are you looking at this pandemic as, is it over for you? Are you?
No.
Okay, you are not done.
No, we're not done. In fact, to the point that yesterday, so we had our little mini outbreak, and then yesterday it was announced that some people that had, it was a guy in quarantine actually, and he was tested twice over the 2 weeks, which was, what the protocols are. And then so he was let out of quarantine, and he's since tested positive. And he went to, he was in, I think he was in Christchurch, went up to Auckland on a plane. Other people on that plane now have it. They don't quite know how it's happened, but he then went to Taupo, which is a place about 2 hours south of where I live, which we were at last weekend, and the family went there as well. And so now they're trying to just track that down and work out, quite what's going to happen. So we're all a little bit on tenterhooks at the moment because no one's quite sure what's going to happen. And because with school holidays as well, everyone's disappeared off to different parts of the country as well. So we're definitely not out of the woods. And we have our COVID app, which we scan everywhere we go and that sort of thing. But definitely can't say it's over.
Okay, well, clearly things are being done very differently in New Zealand. Friends, I do want to make sure that all of you make sure to visit the show notes because Penny has been incredibly generous in just giving us a fantastic idea of the resources that she uses and the resources that she creates and the kinds of things that are important when you are a school librarian in New Zealand. And so I strongly encourage you to spend some time visiting our show notes. But I'm curious, when, in your library, what kinds of things, because having never gone through a pandemic, what kinds of things did you and your New Zealand school librarians find yourself doing because you were trying to keep everyone safe and yet still support your students? Yeah,
it was, we were faking it till we made it, basically. I have a colleague as well, and that's the term we use. We faked it till we made it. In the initial, when we had the 3-day announcement, we literally had no time. We couldn't issue books. As soon as Jacinda announced we were going into lockdown, most kids didn't come to school. So we didn't actually issue huge numbers of physical books. And we were told from the minute that we were in lockdown that we were not allowed back on site, which was unfortunate in the fact that I forgot my laptop's charger and had to and we've been specifically told to not forget our laptop chargers, and I had to rush back into school hours before the lockdown and grab my charger, which was unfortunate. But so we didn't really get any physical books out, so we then relied heavily on the digital. We're fortunate enough to have an e-platform and an audio platform, which we have been pushing for some time, but that came into its own, and I was actually allowed to purchase a second audiobook platform, so that I don't know if you know the way it works over here. The platform that I buy, we share with other schools, and so there are limits on how many books each kid can borrow. So I bought another audiobook platform to to make sure that was a-okay, and we took advantage of many of the freebies that were coming out, actually lots from America and Australia, and just tried to push those towards kids. It was pretty frantic, I have to say.
Is your space being used now? Your library is being used as it was before the pandemic? Do you have students in your library?
Absolutely. It's like nothing has happened. The first 2 weeks we went back, we quarantined, we sanitized all the books. We had it was a massive job. And then we kind of looked around and we looked at, and the kids are coming to school with pencil cases and, other things that were not being sanitized. And we went, this is probably overkill. So we stopped sanitizing the books and we stopped quarantining.
So your books can do an immediate turnaround, or are you doing?
Yep. Wow. Immediate turnaround.
Yeah, friends, I've heard anywhere from 4 days to a full week of quarantine currently. And I don't know about other places in the country, but right now our public libraries, you can't go in. We can get books delivered to our cars, curbside checkout, and that is all that's available. I ran my very first curbside checkout this past week, and students weren't allowed out of their cars. I had a full mask and my gloves, and the kids could point and they could tell me what they wanted, and yeah, it's not good. So I have to ask, having gone through this, it seems like, we all have always had digital resources, but now we have the motivation to use them because the alternatives were not accessible, at least.
That is exactly how I felt like for ages. My colleague who's called Julie, and I have been talking about making little how-to videos, and we've never done it because we've never had the time or the inclination or the know-how. And suddenly it was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to, how are we going to provide a service? How are we going to add value to what our students have? right, well, let's make these how-to videos. So we made how-to videos on how to use our library management system. We made how-to videos on how, inquiry tips, which and that was like a complete game changer for us, because we suddenly, I think suddenly teachers were starting to go, oh, that's what they can do. You know, they're not just sellers of books, and you know, and we're really well looked after at our school. We, you know, that we're valued. We, you know, people like what we do, but I don't think they fully understand or understood what else we could do. So, you know, we just made these little videos. They're not great. They're pretty average, but, you know, they break things down. And they, my senior leader, who's in charge of me, she's amazing. And she said, well, how about we aim these how-to videos, not just at the students, but also at the parents, you know, because these parents are having to teach from home, that they benefit from that. And it was like, oh my goodness, that's so true.
Well, and I'd love to hear that you did a lot of things to build that sense of community when everybody was in isolation, when people were learning from home. And so you were not only reaching out with your resources, but you were also sending out, you were reading chapters to your students.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. How did you go about deciding what you were going to read, and how did you send those things out to your families?
No decision required on my part, because I'll tell you why. Because a message came out somewhere along the lines that J.K. Rowling was allowing people to read Harry Potter as long as you got permission. And I am a fanatic, and I have not read Harry Potter for a number of years because, you know, I just haven't had the time. So I got my my beautiful illustrated versions of Harry Potter, the first one, the Philosopher's Stone, or you guys will know it as the Sorcerer's Stone, and just started reading it and just put it out there via email, because and I had to email the people, whoever was, you know, that were looking after it, to say I was doing it, to get their permission. And it basically, as long as you didn't put it out on the public platform, you know, you were good to go. So I would read a chapter a day, and I found out who was interested, and we got a number of kids who were interested. And adults, actually, which was cool. And yeah, I just read a chapter a day, and it was like the highlight of my day to go and sit down and record a chapter of Harry Potter. And it's so much so that I ended up doing the second book, because I had a number of kids going, can you keep going? Can you keep going? So it was fantastic.
Well, and you used Google Hangouts. I know some of us used Meet and some of us used Zoom. Yep. To keep the students, you know, to support them emotionally while they were learning through distance learning. You know, we're still doing that. That's I know many districts are going to be distance learning until our Thanksgiving in November. Wow. So,
well, to be fair, I didn't do I did Google Hangouts, but I wasn't under the same sort of pressure as the classroom teachers. You know, and I'd say, say, you know, invite me if you want me to come along, and I'll read a story or have a chat, or and I definitely would do things differently if we had it again. I'd be a lot more proactive about just dropping in. I can't remember who you interviewed, but she said that she would just drop in, and I was like, yeah, I should have done that rather than sort of wait for an invitation. But I also contacted individual children or small groups of children, and we had little hangouts and just had chats and read stories and that sort of thing, which was fun.
Oh, excellent. Now, I know we talked briefly about your calendar, but I know this wasn't mentioned. So we are heading into fall. The weather is turning. It's getting much colder. And yet right now you're in spring. Your weather's only getting prettier.
If I showed you what my weather looked like at the moment, it is torrential rain and wind. So literally it's not very nice. We have had beautiful weather, but yeah, our clocks moved forward today, like this morning. And it is a typical kind of early spring day. It is disgusting.
Yeah. But I want to I have to tell you, and I have wanted to, you know, travel to Australia, travel to New Zealand. It's a dream of mine. And my husband reminds me that it's impossible for anybody who's married to an educator, because in the United States, at least, our break for the winter, I'm going to say our holidays, it's Christmas, but it's the holidays that happen at the end of December. We usually have about 9 days to enjoy Christmas with our family and the New Year, but it's very different on a New Zealand calendar. How long do you get for Christmas?
We get 6 weeks at least. Yeah.
Oh
And
my gosh.
it's summer, but I struggle with it being British because I love a cold white Christmas. But it is, yeah, that's our summer holidays. So we have 6 weeks to. So Christmas is kind of like an aside almost. It's the summer holidays. People are wanting to do summer things, so there's happens to be Christmas in there. So it doesn't have that kind of same atmosphere as it does. It's kind of weird going to the shops and they're playing Christmas, snowy music, and it's stinking hot. Yeah, it's a bit weird. But yeah.
I'm going to tell you, on more than one occasion, my first day off from work is Christmas Eve. And wow, it's a hideous schedule. And we have a couple days after the New Year. I've gone back to school on January 2nd.
Yeah, that's what it used to be. That's what it's like in the UK. That's what we'd go back on the 3rd or 4th of January, and yeah.
Oh, it's hideous. All right. So, friends, I want you to learn a little bit more about Penny. Penny and I have been pen pals for quite some time. And it meant a great deal to me to be able to reach out to somebody half a world away. And yet we found that there was so much we could talk about. Penny, back up. Let's tell us a little bit about your school and your teaching responsibilities. What grades are in your school? And because, I think that it would help us better understand your relationship with your students and your staff.
Okay, cool. Yep. So my school is a co-educational private school. So our students pay, their parents pay for them to go, which obviously was has been a little stressful over this time because we obviously rely on them to rely on our parent body. But at the moment, we're okay. It is year 0 to year 8, which you would year 0 is 5. Students in New Zealand start school aged 5, and in the state school they go on their 5th birthday or the day after. So for a new entrant teacher, it must be terrifying because you can constantly have kids coming in, 5-year-olds. We do it slightly differently. We start all our kids at the beginning of the term that they turn 5 or the term after they turn 5, and then we go right up to year 8, which is 13-year-olds. So I'm not quite 100% sure how that fits into your system, but yeah, that's what we have. And so we have, the range of libraryness that's required between 5-year-olds and 13-year-olds.
So, well, and as somebody who has, I teach elementary, sometimes called primary school, but it's 5 years old to usually 10 or 11 years old, and then they go to middle school with those 11 to 14-year-olds, and then high school with the 14 to 18-year-olds. I'm curious, your collection supports children who are 5 to, that's a big age difference. Is that one physical library?
Yeah, one physical library. And I guess I don't know any better because before I was a librarian there, I was a teacher and I wasn't a librarian anywhere else. So I don't know any different. But, we have the range from, we have picture books, early chapter books, sophisticated picture groups, books, lots of graphic novels. And then we have 2 fiction sections. One is what we call general fiction, which are for the younger kids, and then we have what we call a senior fiction, which our year 7 and 8s are allowed to go into, which will be is getting into the YA stuff. So, and it's all in one space. I think we've got about 10,000 books there or thereabouts.
Wonderful. Let me ask, what is your schedule like on a daily basis?
And I think having listened to your podcast, I think I would be on what's called a fixed schedule, and in that every class comes through the library once a week for 40 minutes. They come down for a pit session. So we have a round pit where we teach. It's our teaching space, and then we have 20 minutes down there. And depending on which class it is and what age they are, depends on what we do. And then they have 20 minutes to browse, issue, sit down and read. So it's quite it's a busy 40 minutes. I'm sure you could relate to that. We're trying to fit lots in, but it's fun.
I'm curious though. This isn't release time for your teachers. See,
no.
When I teach, it's a handoff, like, bye. Sometimes they don't even come up the stairs. They just send the children up, and it's like I'm a glorified babysitter. So you have the teacher in the room with you while you're there.
In theory, yes, and they're pretty good. We have our teachers are amazing. They are amazing. And I've been a teacher at the school as well, so I kind of know it's relentless, and as any teacher in any school knows. And so I'm more than willing for them to go and grab a cup of coffee and to go to the toilet, But we do have to work hard at getting them to come in, and different teachers have different ways of doing things, and some are more invested than others. But I encourage them to come to the pit, because as far as I'm concerned, what I'm doing in the pit, I'm hoping is relatable, and for that they can then take back to their classroom and use in their classroom and develop and that sort of thing. So I like them to interject and to heckle me and to interrupt me and to argue with me. It's all part of it. So that's kind of cool. And some are really good at that. And then when they're out in the main body of the library, that's actually almost more vital, because they know their students, I know the books, and that's when we try and marry them together. So they need to be there. It
seems like a wonderful sort of arrangement, because not only are you working in tandem, you can. It's a perfect collaboration opportunity, because if there is things that are going on in the classroom which can tie in with the lessons, the teacher's right there. And
that's right.
You can interweave the things that you're teaching along with what's happening in the classroom, and more, it's what a great arrangement, because then you can be helping the students find the materials which connect to the learning they're doing in the classroom.
That's the theory, but doesn't always work like that, because it's so busy. But yeah, that's the theory, and that's what we've been working on. And I've been in my current job now for 5 years, and I'm so impatient, so impatient, and I just want everything to happen like now, but it doesn't. So these things are all taking time, and collaboration is a big focus of ours at the moment. We really want to. And so yeah, you're absolutely right. Having the teacher there does make it easier, as long as you haven't got 6 children off your shirt tails going, Mrs. Walch, Mrs. Walch.
Can you give me a better? You're referring to something called the pit, and all I can imagine is something that's physically. Are you in this teaching space? Is it a classroom within your library? Are you physically surrounded by your books? And what does it look like? The pit.
The pit. I sometimes refer to it as the pit of despair. If you've ever watched. What do you call? Oh my goodness, the movie Princess Bride. They have the pit of despair. It's not the pit of despair at all. I kind of do it tongue in cheek, but it's kind of it's just this circle. It's a circle which I imagine is about 2 meters in diameter, with a couple of steps going down into it. So the kids come and sit around in the circle, and I'm sitting there with them, and we've got a TV screen if I need it. And I bring down, I have a little shelf where I bring down new books. So every week we try and put out some new books, and the kids they're out there for the whole week, and the kids can reserve them if they want them. And sometimes we talk about the new books, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're doing other stuff. And they, if they're the little kids, we sing songs and read stories and that sort of thing. And then, 20 minutes is up, they hop out of the pit and off they go.
Wonderful. Can I ask, you mentioned here about being a teacher in the building. Did you receive formal training in library education, library school? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't want you to be self-conscious, but less than 1% of our downloads happen in New Zealand. The vast majority of people listening are learning about New Zealand and the school library there for the very first time. I know I certainly am. But tell us a little bit about how you got from the classroom into the library, because you sound happy and this is something you wanted to do. It didn't happen by accident. Did it happen by accident?
Well, sort of happened by accident. First thing that I don't know if I have not quite sure if I've got a correct handle on this, but I believe you guys have to have is it a master's in library study?
It depends.
Oh, okay. Because we don't.
Yeah, it depends. And a lot of people will get a certificate, which is about half the classes that a master's program has. Many people get the master's degree. But people I talk to all the time have a teaching certificate and then a library certificate. Some people have a master's degree, and every state in the United States has different expectations and requirements of their teachers.
Yes, so for us, so I hopefully I don't, put myself on the spot here, but I don't have a full library diploma. I have a Bachelor of Education and taught for a number of years before going into the libraries. And when I became the assistant librarian, which that kind of happened by accident as well. It was one of those sort of, in the right place at the right time scenarios. I started doing a library diploma, which was 6 papers, and I completed 3 of them, and then had an unfortunate altercation with breast cancer, so that put that on hold, which was fun and games. That was about 7 years ago. So then I went back into a classroom and came back to be the librarian, just because our previous librarian retired a year earlier than they were expecting her to. And I had done some library work before, and so they popped me back into the library, and like bingo, again, right place at the right time. I've always loved books and reading, and it became I'm a very slow processor. It takes things years for me, pennies to drop in my little head, and it was like, oh yeah, this is me. And so the other day I thought, I must finish my diploma. I must make myself official. So I went back to look into it, and they've changed it since I did my 3 papers. Of course they have. And now only 2 of my papers count, and I still would need to do 6. And so now I've gone, it's just too busy. And I learn enough on the job, and I learn enough by listening to your podcast and going to PD and around the place. I'm thinking, no, that can wait. So yes, I'm not actually officially a qualified librarian.
Well, it sounds like, learning from experience. You're just sort of thrown into the situation, and you figure out what works best for your students in your school. And I think you're in good company in that respect. Quick mention: you are not alone. You have a coworker in your library with you. Her name is Julie.
Yes. She's amazing. She keeps me on the straight and narrow, because I'm the sort of person that goes, oh, there's an idea, let's do it. And she goes, have you thought about it? Have you thought what we actually need to do? When we Johnified, I was like, let's just do it. Let's Johnify. And she broke it all down. So yeah, she's amazing. She's a remarkable lady. She trains our lit quiz teams. Her biggest claim to fame is that she took her team to Connecticut in 2015 and won the World Kids Lit Quiz final. And every year since, her teams do really, really well. She's hugely involved in Kids Lit, and she's an expert in YA stuff, and she's amazing. So she's a good person to have around.
Friends, Melissa Tom has talked about this New Zealand sort of this connection with things happening in Connecticut for this Kid Lit quiz. And it sounds so fantastic. I know that this year it's probably was suspended, and they'll continue it hopefully next year.
Well, it has happened this year. When we're about to have ours has been postponed. We're about to have our competition in a couple of weeks, but there won't be a world final or anything. It was supposed to be at our school this year, and we were organising it, but it didn't happen, obviously.
Oh, I'm sorry. Now,
yeah.
I'm curious, because many of us in the United States, we find ourselves also having to pick up other responsibilities outside of the library. Do you have, as your school librarian, any other duties as assigned, things that you have to do to support your school community?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in the good old days, I had to coach hockey. I am a terrible hockey coach. I'm a terrible sports coach, full stop. It's not my thing. And whilst I was sort of not working when I was had my kids and stuff, I took over the school yearbook, school magazine, we call it. And had to give that up when I was back in teaching again. So that came up again, and I was like, I'll do the yearbook. I'll do the yearbook. Get me out of hockey coaching. So I do that, which is a massive job. But I really enjoy it. I really enjoy froofing around on computers and making things look pretty. So that's good. And I do your normal duties. So bus duties, and I do most of the library duties during the week, unless Julie's around, and she'll do a few as well. What else do we? Our school is really big into performing arts, and so every year most staff are involved in that in some way, and I do the program and the photography for that, which is super fun. It's one of my favourite things. The day that we go and take the photos at the dress rehearsal, my favourite day of the year, quite possibly. So, I put that together. So, there's a little bit extra.
Wonderful. I'm curious because you mentioned your school is a private school, but it's also a boarding school. And so you have day students, you have students who are in the boarding school program. Can I ask you, is any of that find its way into your library program, that you do have a boarding school component attached to the day students who come to your school every day?
Well, this is going to sound terrible, but the main way that we're impacted by the boarders is the fact that they tend to lose books quite readily. They disappear into a black hole in the boarding house, which is great that they're taking books out. But it's hilarious. About once a term, one of the boarders or one of the teachers or the boarding house teachers will come over with a massive armful of books and go, "Look, we found these." That's probably the main thing. It sounds awful. Julie and I have talked about going and doing reading to the boarders at night time, which has just never come about. Our headmaster, so we don't call our head principal or anything like that. We call him the headmaster. I think that's a private school thing. His wife, she comes to help me once a week with some of my littlies, and she'll always take picture books back with her to read to the girls at night. She's really into supporting us and connecting with the boarders and things like that. But that's definitely an area that Julie and I are aware that we could do a little bit better. But yeah, mostly it doesn't really affect us.
Fun. And in doing some of my research for this episode, I noticed your school is divided into houses.
Yeah.
And all I could think of was the Sorting Hat and Harry Potter. But can you tell me how, if your school is divided into these houses, do you incorporate any of that into your library program? Because I understand that there are some levels of competition that happen if your student body is in these groups, these multi-age groups.
Absolutely, it's fantastic. So the main thing would be during our book week that we run four book quizzes and across the age ranges, and they're split into houses, and they compete to, basically we're trying to find out the most literary house. So my house hasn't won for some time, actually. So I need to sort of rig some questions to make sure that we win again soon. But that will be the main thing. And the other thing is that, during library classes, we have the house colours. I just have a chart, and depending on the age group, I'll give out house points. For kids that, the littlies, if they've shown me their barcode, you get 10 house points. Or for the big kids, maybe if they find books in the wrong place and they go and put them back in the right place, more house points. That'll be the main thing. Unfortunately, we don't have a big, like in Harry Potter, that thing that magically just changes and you just go 10 points for Gryffindor. We don't have one of those.
No.
Well, so cool.
There's always next year. So, yeah. As somebody who's never experienced a house system in my school, it sounds like not only a way to build a team support across different grade levels, but there's also an element of behavior management, that you have a way to encourage students to behave well because it reflects well on their houses.
Yeah, I don't actually use it a huge amount like that in the library. That might not be a bad idea. Possibly don't necessarily need to. Our kids, of course we have some kids that don't always behave themselves in the library, but because there's two adults in there, and because most kids want to be in there, I don't have huge problems. It's a great job in many respects. I don't have to get grumpy too often. So
and their classroom teachers are there too. Let's not forget you have 3 adults. Many of us work all by ourselves.
Well, we have two adults because Julie isn't. No, if Julie's on teaching, I'll be doing something else and vice versa. So we may be around, and sometimes we will step in to help out the other one if you can see that something's going a little bit haywire. And sometimes the teachers don't come because they've, it's an easy one to go, I've just got to nip to an appointment because that there's going to be another adult there. So they sometimes don't come. So if that's the case, then we kind of look out for each other. But yeah, definitely having two adults in the room helps with behaviour management.
I want to back up. You said that you do a quiz between the houses. Can you give us a little bit more of an explanation in terms of when does this happen during your school year, and how do you how do the kids participate? Is it do they elect to do this, or do they create teams representing each of the houses?
Yeah, so it's during book week, which is usually held in May, and we have a junior book quiz, which are for the year 0 to 4s, and then we have a year 5 and 6 book quiz, and then we have a year 7 one, and then a year 8 one, and every kid is involved. They didn't used to be. It used to be just the literary kids, and the other kids would all have to watch, which was like watching paint dry. It was terrible. So every kid is involved. I do all the donkey work. I put all the kids into teams. Otherwise, it would be a massive job. Put them into teams of maybe 4 or 5 kids, and we set out our big hall with seats and all the house colours and whatnot. And Julie and I just write a series of, I think, 4 or 5 rounds of questions, 8 questions in each round, based on a theme. So it's heavily based on the Kids Lit Quiz format that Julie is heavily involved in. So it looks quite a lot like that. And we just generally dress up, and with the younger kids, we get older kids helping, and they'll come and dress up, and we'll read questions and give out prizes and have a winning team at the end, and then a winning house at the end of the whole thing. And it's fun. It's really fun.
Are these focused around certain books that the students have read, or more generalized questions?
We try and sort of make it around books that we know are popular, because a lot of the kids that are in the room are not, it's every kid in the school. So some of them are not big readers. So we want it to be manageable for everyone. We don't aim at high. So the Lit Quiz kids who come in and are part of the teams, for them it's probably quite easy, and guaranteed that the winning team will have a Lit Quiz kid in it, because they'll know the answers. But it's meant to be just a little bit of fun, and increase the idea, or get across the idea that reading is fun, and we can all do it. Last year I had a bit of a revelation. So for one of the quizzes I brought in, we were lucky enough, we had 4 ex-pupils who are also high-profile sports people in New Zealand, and I nabbed them, and they all came along. And so for the kids, the sporty kids, for them to come in, and they just gave us a little bit of a spiel about what they like to read, which was in one case absolutely nothing. But yeah. That was fun. But, that they were there, and they asked some of the questions, and they answered some questions about their sport, and it was really cool.
Well, this is about building a community of readers, and that's something that we have revisited in the podcast several times. I'm curious about your collection. You've mentioned it a little bit. And, we all are very intentional in how we build our collections to reflect our students' interests and the teachers' curricular priorities. Can you give us an idea of what kinds of sort of expectations and demands are being placed on your collection as you build it each year?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Expectations and demands. It goes. Goes back to me being a little bit like, oh, let's get this book and let's get that book, and I am not always the most strategic person, and so that's where Julie comes in. She is. So the fact that we've genreified has helped me become a little bit more strategic, I think. So now we can kind of look and go, right. And at the moment, we're looking at our fantasy section. It's quite dated. So we're looking at that and going, right, we actually need to sort that. So we're about in a couple of weeks' time going to embark on our stock take, and we're going to hit the fantasy section because we can clearly see, what's going in that section. We've also we kind of decimated Dewey a couple of years ago, so we can now very clearly see where we need to look at in nonfiction. We've got all our nonfiction books in face-out boxes. And we can easily see what's required. We have lots of little kids who love animal books, and they get trashed. So we have to keep replenishing those. We have different big ideas going on around the school, and we have to decide what kind of books we need to bring in for those, or whether we use our national library system, which is amazing. We can get books for free from them. So, yeah. Strategy is something I have to work on.
So you can request books to come in from your national library circulation. Yes. So it does relieve you of some of the obligation to have a collection as big as one would require.
That's right. So this last term, our Year 8s have just done a big unit on, it's called Big Issues Affecting New Zealand. And it was, on things like part of our election was we're voting on a referendum about marijuana, about legalizing marijuana, and it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily want loads of books in the library surrounding that. So, but for general use. But we could ask for those. So National Library sent us books about that, books about racism, books about, we're also having a euthanasia referendum as well. So we had books sent in about euthanasia, so things that we wouldn't necessarily have in our library, which is really good to support what we've got. And then I also asked for some additional. We've got a really good graphic novel collection, but I asked for additional ones of those. And the number of graphic novels out there now. And they sent through so many graphic novels that we didn't have, and it was fantastic. So our lovers of graphic novels were like, they were reading all those ones as well. And it's just a really good way of supplementing our collection.
Well, and it does alleviate some of this pressure to try and have everything for your students at their fingertips. They have to put a little bit of thought, though, into requesting these books, because what kind of turnaround time do you have when your students request books from the National Library System?
That's actually a tricky question, because you're only allowed to order in bulk once a term. So, and you're only allowed one orderer, which is me. So I have to gather together, and force teachers to think about what they want for the next term. So that's kind of a biggish turnaround. I try and get in early so we get the good stuff. But we can also randomly request individual items, which doesn't happen as often because of the turnaround. You are going to be a week or so down the track before it arrives. So that's not ideal. But it's an amazing service.
Can I ask, you said that you decimated Dewey, so you have genreified your nonfiction as well?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it genreified, but I suppose you would. So we were fed up with all the decimal points. It was too confused. It confused me. So God help the children, poor things. There was another librarian, a secondary school librarian, who had done something similar. So she very kindly sent through how she had rearranged Dewey. So we were guided by Dewey, but we just simplified everything. So we have no decimal points now. It's just more user-friendly, kid-user-friendly language. There's sections on animals and New Zealand animals and that sort of thing.
Well, in the interest of increasing access, and you want your collection to be accessible to your students, so you make these kinds of adjustments. I think that there are a lot of school librarians nodding their heads right now, because it makes so much sense, and there are parts of Dewey which don't make sense. That is another episode. And so, friends, there is your call out. If somebody would like to get in touch with me, we would love to do an episode on sort of reimagining your nonfiction section. Call me. I would like to know, you do mention you're in a private school and you're very dependent on tuition, which the families pay. Do you have a fundraiser that you participate in to raise money for your programming and your collection?
So there's you asked me that question via the email, and I had to have a little think about that. And there actually is, because initially I thought, we don't really do anything, but no, actually we do. So a couple of years ago, I instigated the Scholastic Book Fair, which I think you guys will understand. Which obviously. Kids buy stuff, or grandparents buy stuff, because we did it on Grandparents' Day. Grandparents buy stuff, and then we benefit from that, which, was really successful. What happened this year was slightly different, and now I'm in a quandary, because we had, obviously Grandparents' Day, well, not obviously, but Grandparents' Day was postponed. So we had to cancel our Scholastic Book Fair, and we didn't know when Grandparents' Day was going to happen. And then they rescheduled it, and I was like, and we have a number of local booksellers in town who are locally owned. We have a couple of them anyway. And I was like, these guys need our support. So I said, well, rather than have a Scholastic Book Fair, why don't we get a couple of these booksellers in, and they can sell on our Grandparents' Day, because our grandparents, they're generous people and they were happy to buy. But, this was in the knowledge that it wouldn't be like Scholastic, that we would get rewards at the other end of it. But, we could polish our halos and know that we were doing something good for our community, because one of our local booksellers is a parent, and one is a specialist children's bookshop. So they came in and they sold books, and that was really good. So we didn't really benefit from Scholastic this year, and also the Scholastic book club, the book club order things that parents can do, that hasn't really happened this year. We have a parents association who we can put in requests for funding through. So they do the fundraising, and then they have a little pot of money, and then we as staff can then request the money. So they funded our first year of our ebook platform. They funded the first year of our audiobook platform. They've bought us some tablets. We requested for lots of dyslexia-friendly books this year. That's not going to happen though. Everything's on hold. So hopefully that will happen next year. We'll just get a whole lot more Barrington Stoke dyslexia-friendly books. So that's probably where the funding comes in.
I have to ask, is Grandparents' Day something where people come visit your school? Or
you have no idea. It is the biggest day of the school year. We had to think long and hard this year about having it, because obviously grandparents are, a lot of them are older people, and, COVID. But it was in between, the level 4 lockdown and then this mini spike. So we had it. We had our Grandparents' Day, and it is heaving. It is, the place swarms with grandparents. It is unbelievable.
And
it's massive.
I'm just curious. I guess, so they come to school, and it's sort of an open day and
yes.
of a celebration, and the kids do fun things with their grandparents, and it's not so much a school day as it is a sort of almost festival vibe. I mean,
totally, yeah. And the kids tour their grandparents around the school. They go to their classrooms, and most teachers will have something organised, some sort of low key activity or whatever. Then the kids take their grandparents around all the specialist areas of the school, so they all swarm into the library, and you can't move. And we take photos, and it's amazing. And then they all go off. We have a chapel, because we're an Anglican private school. There's a chapel, so they trot off to chapel, and then they trot off and listen to our choirs sing, and our rock bands, and orchestras and that sort of thing. It's it's a full-on amazing day. Yeah.
Oh, now I want a Grandparents' Day in my school. I do. Cool. I want to ask, just because people will be curious. When we look at our programs, when we look at the things we want to desperately fix and improve, can you share with us the kinds of things that you see ahead? What kinds of challenges would you like to take on in your library space?
I'm actually in the middle of a challenge at the moment, which I'm hoping is coming to the end, and I'm hoping that I'm being successful. So Julie and I have a long time, wanted to tout ourselves not just as booksellers, but also as experts in inquiry learning and that sort of thing. And so the nature of our school sees that in Year 7, we have a big influx of students coming in. It's what we call intermediate school here. So we have a big influx of kids come in, and, with various levels of understandings around inquiry. And so we've been touting for a while, saying, it's asking for those kids, for the Year 7 classes, to have an hour in the library, not 40 minutes, so that we can support inquiry. And I've taken that to a senior leader 3 times. And the first 2 times was like big smiley face, but, shaky head. No, that's not happening. That's not happening. Over lockdown, Julie and I sort of focused our thinking a little bit more. So we've become increasingly more specific about how we want it to work, so we can actually explain it better. And we started to be a bit more strategic about how we were approaching the problem. And I was taking it to my senior leader, not the senior leader that we needed it to. And she was coming round. She could see it was valuable. And she happened to be at a Year 8 meeting about 2 months ago. And they said, we so wish that the kids coming from Year 7 would come with a toolkit of inquiry skills, so we don't have to, teach them. And Karen, my senior leader, she was like, well, as it happens, we've been talking about this with the librarians. So we then took it back to the other senior leader, who is in charge of timetabling. We went through the timetable. We worked out where all the 6 year 7 classes could be fitted in, where any classes that were displaced would need to move to, and we took him this timetable and showed it to him and said, "This is how it could work." And after some more head nodding, and we were thinking, no, he's going to say no again. He said, "No, I'm going to take that to senior management, and we're not 100% sure yet, but we think it might happen." So, and so now we just need to nut down what we do with them.
And I think that what we have to hear is first of all persistence. Because if at first you don't succeed, try again, and you know in your head that what you want to do is best for your students, that you have your students' best interests at heart, and that a program that you are uniquely positioned to offer to your students is one that is worth going to bat again and again. And it sounds like it's going to happen. And as this takes shape, that you and Julie can refine it and hone it to a fantastic. It's going to benefit all of your students, and I don't see how any administrator can argue with that.
No, he just needed persuading, and I know his job is a tough one, and he has to basically organise the timetable every year and juggle that. And so, it was kind of a in the too hard basket kind of scenario. But because we went with a solution, which I'm learning to do, it's no point going to anyone with a problem and then just going, sort it out. You have to go with your solution. That made all the difference. And the fact that the year 8s had articulated that they want the year 7s coming up into their classes with a toolkit. So now we have to put our money where our mouths are and develop a program. So I actually had a meeting last week about that, and we've sort of nutted out how it would look. And we kind of have a 2-semester approach, even though we have 4 terms. We have a 2-semester approach, and we can see how it would work. And we're going to take that to the teachers hopefully soon. So
well, but I think you're not revising an existing program. You're instituting something that hasn't been there before. And therefore, what you do can only be perceived as good. And that what you're offering to your students, they have nothing to compare it to. I'm just saying that you shouldn't be as concerned. I think that your teachers are going to be on board very quickly when they realize that you're only making their jobs easier.
That's the kind, and I think that was one of the things prior was that they didn't really understand. They thought we were kind of like asking for an extra 20 minutes in the library. You're asking for more, but actually what we're doing is and taking away 20 minutes from something else. But what we're actually trying to do is support, what else is going on in the classroom, in the actual physical classroom, and we're not trying to take away. We're trying to supplement and assist and support the teachers by helping them, by being an expert. And I'm only just now starting to feel like, we're classed as specialists, but as a librarian, we're kind of in that funny middle ground kind of area. But I'm starting now to feel like I can call myself a specialist because, we really thought about this and talked about it. And so it's good.
Square peg, round hole. I mean, the whole idea of the podcast is square peg, round hole. We are educators, and yet we somehow don't fit the traditional mold of a classroom teacher or grade level teacher. That's right. And, I think when you become so essential to the academic achievement of your students, all of a sudden your role in their learning becomes that much more solidified. And I don't want to use the word just, but in addition to instilling them a love of reading and research skills and digital literacy, but you're also going to support them in what they're doing in the classrooms. It's huge. I want to give you an opportunity before we close to brag. I'd like you to tell me something about your program that you're so proud about, and it's something that you really, really feel that really helps your program stand out.
Oh my goodness! That's a tricky question. There's lots of little things, I guess. Like one of the, and this is going to sound ridiculous. But one of the things I'm really proud of is that I've run these 2 Harry Potter weeks that's super popular, so much fun, a huge amount of work, but just there's things like that are really cool that I'm proud of. What else? I instigated like a little reading interviews with kids that are struggling. So they will come and see me. Oftentimes it will happen after learning conferences, and parents will see the teacher and say, oh, Johnny's struggling with reading. And so they can come and see me, and we'll have a little bit of a reading chat, and I'll give them some ideas of where to go next and that sort of thing. So it's just like a little thing that affects one student at a time. And that's cool. I like doing those. But
you become sort of like a reading consultant.
A little bit like that, yes.
Yeah. And what a treat. Now I have to ask, are you working with these students individual, or is it just sort of when they're there in the pit and they're ready to go and check out books? Do you have this opportunity to sit down with the student and talk to them about
Don't have time for when we're in a classroom session, no time. So I book a time. So I think it's a Wednesday morning. I have a bit of time that I book. And usually I work one-on-one. Occasionally a couple of kids will come, and usually with very different needs. So I sort of juggle too. But it's kind of cool just working with a kid, and you can just talk about what they like or what they don't like. And then I can target, exactly. And I give them a pile of books, and they read the blurbs, and we chat about them, and they decide which ones they might like to, read. And I make a bookmark with a list on it so that they can bring that back to the library another time, because obviously they can't take all the books with them there and then, because they can't read them all at once. And they've got a target to know, what to look for. And it's really cool when a kid comes back and they've got their little blazer on and they pull the list out of their pocket and go, oh, look, I brought my list. And then they go and find the book on the shelf, and it's cool.
Well, and I love that you're doing this in conjunction with the teachers, that the teachers have identified that this would be beneficial for the student. And so you are seen as a specialist, somebody who can support their student in doing better academically. Mm. That's wonderful.
World domination is our aim.
Yes, really. Yes. Similar, also in the United States, we are looking forward to dominating the world. I have to ask, and this sounds very arrogant, but I know that you listen to the podcast, and have you ever listened to the podcast and something did not connect? You're like, oh, it must be an American thing that she's talking about. Have we ever just missed connecting on some level with New Zealand school librarian issues? When we talk about things in the podcast, have we ever sort of just, you're like, no, that's an American thing, not a New Zealand thing?
I don't think sort of necessarily specific librarian. It's just some of your terminology, and I think that's more, and I have to go and look it up. What do you have, school administrators or something? And I was like, what does that mean? So nothing really library related, nothing major. I mean, most of the time, I think I've said to you in emails, I often listen to your podcast while I'm walking, and I walk around and I listen, and part of me goes, oh, yes, thank goodness I'm doing the right thing. Oh, my goodness. So part of me is patting myself on the back, and another part, and then I'm with my phone, I'm making little notes and emails to myself, and I'm going to walk into a lamppost one day because I'm not looking where I'm going, because I'm going, oh, I must do that, and send myself emails. So mostly not. Actually, one of the interesting ones that I'd listened to and has really hit home was Casey Boyd. And I think, you have a whole other level of race stuff going on where you are, which we have, but that was interesting, like really interesting, really real eye opener listening to it. And it made me, and when you said, when I suggested that we talk about New Zealand and COVID and stuff, and I thought, oh my God, did I really actually just do that? And that's who I thought. I thought, I'm not in the same league as someone like her who is unbelievably amazing and such a mover and a shaker. And I go, oh my goodness, what was I doing suggesting that we talk?
Well, and can I just say right now that I'm guaranteeing right now when the Americans listen to you, that you're giving them ideas of things they would like to do in their programs.
I'm starting to learn that it's a two-way street.
And the podcast would come to an abrupt halt if people like you didn't say yes. And when I ask, and I will be very vulnerable here and just say, not everybody says yes. So when somebody like you so generously says, absolutely, I'd love to be on your podcast, that is why we're on season 3. And I am so excited because I know, listeners don't know, but I know what episodes are coming up. And I am just going to enjoy sharing your expertise with the world. And I'm so pleased to know that when I put an episode out there, that somebody on the other side of the planet appreciates the work that we do over here.
Absolutely. You do an amazing job. Amazing. You are my PD for the year. My husband, who is in charge of PD at my school, thinks it's amazing because it's all free and he doesn't have to pay for it. He jokes whenever I say to him, he's very good. I'm going to make him sound terrible. But whenever I ask for money for PD, he goes, are you going to do some more, learn more about how to shelve books properly? So he's a shocker.
Yeah. No, and friends, that's a nice little time because last week we did create a PD certificate, which you can, you can make your own copy. You can insert the episode you listen to and then just digitally send it off to your administrator or to your, whoever's keeping track of your PD hours. And that was a request that came from Texas, actually. So I know that you can't beat the price or the fact that it's, convenient and it's customizable. And, but Penny, you are an absolute delight. I am so grateful that you took some time out of your Sunday morning, to talk with us today. And I hope we'll still be pen pals.
Absolutely. Loved it. So exciting. Who doesn't love talking about libraries? Really?
Yes, and everybody who's listening to you right now is nodding their head. So, would you let us know? I know you said that you're not. You do some social media. Could you let listeners know where we can find you on social media, please?
Absolutely. So, Facebook is my library. Facebook is my main thing. That would be where I do a lot. I'm very active on that. At the beginning of the year, I sort of tried to get into Instagram and Twitter. Instagram's kind of cool. We get a lot of ex-pupils looking at our Instagram, which is really cool. Twitter, I just don't get. I try and I go and I followed all your people I've listened to on yours and I follow them. I find Twitter like a big mess. But we are on there and it's at Southwell Library, but with only 2 L's. So Southwell's got 2 L's at the end and then it merges into library. So there's not 3 L's simply because it wouldn't let me put the 3rd L in. And I think the Instagram is also at Southwell Library as well.
Well, and friends, that'll be in the show notes. And I'll tell you what, Library Facebook, Library Twitter is one of the more friendly places you can be on Twitter. So if you want to go somewhere where people are supportive and encouraging and helpful and they want all of us to succeed, Library Twitter is worth investigating in. I can't say that is true for the rest of Twitter, but when it comes to social media and school librarians, we really do a good job of supporting one another. I wish you the best of luck as you finish the rest of your school year.
Thank you. One more term to go. Woohoo!
Friends, I am so grateful to Penny that she was able to join us and have this conversation. I'm going to tell you right now, the mental gymnastics of trying to schedule a podcast with somebody who lives half a world away. Honestly, I had to take a paper and pen and write it down because we wanted to make sure we didn't miss each other. So when you interview somebody who is 16 time zones away, and then throw in a time change because New Zealand had their daylight savings earlier than we do here in the States, I appreciate all that we were able to do together and all with the power of Skype. So, thank you very much, Penny, for sharing with us and honestly making this community seem even smaller and more personal. And it does, when you talk to people who live half a world away and we all have so much in common, it just really helps me realize how lucky we are to be doing what we do and have to find people who all share the same kind of excitement we have about being in our libraries and working with our students. I also want to mention that Penny, even though much of our conversation did not involve things like teaching resources, She is incredibly generous, and without me even asking, she started embedding our show notes with all these fantastic resources. Friends, if you like Bitmoji pages, and it's so helpful to see what other librarians put out there, she put everything out that would be really just helpful in having us understand the kinds of things that she's been doing, and gives us a real good understanding of the kind of issues and challenges that make being in say New Zealand different from being, say, in the United States. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Before I forget, for any of you who can apply for professional development credits by listening to podcasts, I have included at the top of our show notes an editable PD form, which you can submit digitally to your PD office. And I also want to make sure that if anybody is so moved, if you'd like to leave a review on your podcatcher of choice, it really does help other people find this podcast. I dislike the word algorithms, but they are going to help other people find the show. The topic of our next episode will be virtual burnout and self-care, and my interview with Andrea Trudeau. I hope you will tune in.